I'm laughing because this court can't touch me. My last name outranks this room.
This is my courtroom, and your name has zero value here. You don't posture, threaten, or laugh in this room, not ever. Bailiff, take him into custody for contempt and remove him. Now, in 38 years on the bench, I have learned that power rarely announces itself with silence. Real authority sits back. It watches. It waits. What announces itself loudly is insecurity dressed up as confidence. I have seen it come from uniforms, from titles, from money, and from last names that people think are shields. Most days, I let arrogance burn itself out. I let people talk. I let them show me who they are. That morning, however, I knew from the first sound of his voice that this was not going to be an ordinary hearing. This was going to be a lesson. Earlier, when he stood there and laughed, when he said the words, "I'm laughing because this court can't touch me. My last name outranks this room." He wasn't speaking to me alone. He was speaking to everyone watching. He was testing the walls. He wanted to see if the room would bend. He believed the courtroom owed him something, simply because of who he was born to be. That belief didn't come from nowhere. Men like him are taught it early. His fire was thin, but his posture was heavy with entitlement. As he stood there, shoulders loose, chin high, hands resting, like he owned the table, the room felt different. Defendants usually shrink. They avoid eye contact. They clear their throats before they speak. He did none of that. He smiled. Not a nervous smile, a bored one. The kind of smile that says he has been here before and walked away untouched. I recognized it immediately. I had seen it on corporate executives, on connected officials, on sons who had never been told no in their lives. I did not interrupt him. Silence is a tool people underestimate. When someone expects fear and receives quiet, it unsettles them. He mistook that silence for weakness. He leaned into it. He laughed again, just slightly, as if to remind everyone that this was entertainment to him. What he said earlier wasn't spontaneous. It was practiced. It was the product of years of watching problems disappear after phone calls, years of watching consequences soften when his last name was spoken aloud. As the hearing moved forward, I watched how he reacted to the process itself. He didn't listen. He waited. He shifted his weight like time was beneath him. Every document that was referenced, every procedural step seemed to irritate him. He wasn't afraid of the charge. He was offended by the idea that it applied to him. That distinction matters. Fear makes people cautious. Offense makes them careless. What he didn't understand was that a courtroom does not operate on the currency he was used to spending. Influence has no exchange rate here. Titles do not carry interest. I wasn't interested in where he came from. I was interested in how he behaved when he thought no one could stop him earlier. When he laughed and declared the room powerless, he showed me exactly what I needed to see. People tell the truth when they think they are untouchable. By the time the courtroom settled, after his outburst, the tension wasn't coming from anger. It was coming from anticipation. The audience could feel it. They sense when a line has been crossed, even if they don't know what comes next. He still believed he was winning. He stood there with the confidence of someone who thought consequences were theoretical. He had no idea how loud arrogance sounds in a room built for accountability. I looked at him and said very little. I didn't need to raise my voice. Authority doesn't echo. It lands. I reclaimed the room, not with volume, but with certainty. When I reminded him that his name held no value here, it wasn't an insult. It was a statement of fact. Courtrooms are the last places where inheritance stops at the door. He learned in that moment that the rules he lived by did not apply inside those walls. What he didn't realize yet was that his own words had narrowed his path. Earlier statements have weight. The way someone stands, the way they speak, the way they dismiss the process, all of it becomes part of the record, even when it isn't written down. Confidence becomes evidence when it turns into contempt. He had crossed from bravado into defiance, and defiance always carries a price. People often ask me why I let defendants talk, why I don't cut them off sooner. The answer is simple. Power reveals itself when it feels safe. I wanted everyone watching to hear exactly how he viewed the court, the law, and the people affected by his actions. I wanted there to be no confusion later about who he thought he was. In that moment, he gave me that gift freely. Before I continue, let me ask you something. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from. I read them. I always have. It reminds me that these rooms matter far beyond their walls, and that accountability travels farther than people think. He walked in believing the courtroom was just another obstacle to be negotiated. He believed charm, confidence, and a famous name would do the work for him. He didn't understand that silence had already shifted the ground beneath his feet. The moment he laughed, the moment he claimed the room was beneath him, the ending became inevitable. He just didn't know it yet. By the time the courtroom settled, the shift was already complete. The noise hadn't grown louder. It had disappeared. Silence filled the space where his confidence had been. Earlier, when he stood there, laughing, he thought volume was power. Now he was learning that stillness is heavier. He remained upright, but the ease in his shoulders was gone. He had said what he said, and the room had not reacted the way he expected. That unsettled him more than anger ever could. At that point, he still believed he was winning. Not because the law favored him, but because it always had before. He looked around as if waiting for something familiar. A signal, a nod, a rescue. People raised like him are trained to watch for exits others don't see. They assume every situation contains a hidden door, and what he didn't understand was that this room had already closed them. As the hearing moved forward, I watched how carefully he stopped listening. That is always the second tell. The first is arrogance, the second is dismissal. He wasn't absorbing words anymore. He was measuring how long he had to stand there before it ended. He adjusted his jacket. He rolled his jaw. Small movements, but they spoke loudly. Earlier confidence had hardened into irritation. That irritation was turning into risk. I kept my voice level. I always do. People confuse calm with mercy. They are not the same thing. Calm is clarity, and clarity is dangerous to someone who survives on confusion and pressure. He wanted confrontation. He wanted friction. Without it, his performance had nowhere to land. He had no opponent to overpower. What he didn't realize yet was that his own posture had already done the work. The way he stood earlier, the way he laughed, the way he declared the room beneath him, all of it framed what followed. Authority does not need to chase disrespect. It lets it expose itself. He had done that willingly. The record doesn't just live on paper. It lives in memory, in witnesses, in the collective understanding of a moment. Earlier, when he said his last name outranked the room, he revealed how he understood the world. To him, law was flexible. It was something negotiated behind closed doors, softened by proximity to power. Consequences were optional. He didn't see himself as a defendant. He saw himself as an exception, temporarily inconvenienced. That belief shaped every movement he made. The courtroom wasn't watching him anymore. They were watching the space between us. They were watching what I would allow to stand. That is always the real trial. People don't come to court just to see outcomes. They come to see whether rules mean anything. They come to see if authority bends. When tested, he didn't know it, but he had made himself a symbol the moment he spoke. As the minutes passed, his expression changed again. The smile faded, not replaced by fear, but by calculation. He was adjusting. That's when people like him are most dangerous to themselves. Calculation without control leads to mistakes. He shifted his weight and spoke again, not louder this time, but sharper. The tone wasn't confidence anymore, it was insistence. He wanted the process to move faster, he wanted it over. I didn't respond immediately. Silence stretches differently when someone is impatient. It forces them to sit inside their own words. Earlier arrogance echoes back when there's nothing to interrupt it. I watched him realize that the room wasn't moving on his schedule. That realization landed slowly, then all at once. People often think power is about presence. It's not. It's about restraint, the ability to let someone reveal themselves completely before intervening. I had no need to argue with him. He had already done the arguing for me. Every dismissive glance, every careless word narrowed his position further. What he didn't know was that the line he crossed earlier couldn't be uncrossed. You can apologize for a mistake. You can correct a misunderstanding. You cannot rewind contempt. Once it's spoken aloud, contempt changes how everything that follows is interpreted. It reframes intention. It removes doubts. The room felt smaller to him now. He stood in the same place, but the space had changed. That's what happens when illusion breaks. It doesn't shatter loudly. It collapses inward. He was still upright, still defiant on the surface, but the certainty underneath had fractured. I looked at him again, not with anger, not with disappointment, but with finality. There is a moment in every hearing when options disappear. He had passed that moment earlier, when he laughed. He just didn't feel it yet. Consequences don't always announce themselves immediately. Sometimes they wait until belief runs out. Before I go further, let me ask you something. Tell me in the comments if you have ever seen someone talk their way into a worse outcome. Moments like this happen everywhere, not just in courtrooms. Arrogance doesn't recognize boundaries until they close. He still thought this would end, like all the others, a delay, a call, a quiet exit. He didn't understand that. This time, the silence wasn't waiting on him. It was waiting for what came next, and what came next would finish what his own words had started. He didn't realize it yet, but the moment had already passed him by. The confidence he brought into the room earlier had nowhere left to stand. What he said, the way he said it, and the certainty behind it had done their work. People think consequences arrive loudly. They don't. They arrive quietly. Once every alternative is gone, he was still upright, still trying to look unbothered, but the air around him had changed in a way posture could not fix. What he didn't know was that earlier words don't fade. They settle. They become the lens through which everything else is viewed. When someone laughs at the authority of a courtroom, that laughter becomes part of the record. Whether it's written down or not, it informs intent. It defines respect. believes they are optional. He had made his position clear long before I responded. The room went still in a way that felt permanent, not tense, not dramatic, final. That kind of stillness doesn't ask for attention. It commands it. He glanced around just briefly, and for the first time his eyes didn't find reassurance. No nods, no sympathetic faces, no quiet signals. He was alone in the space he had tried to dominate. Earlier, when he declared that his last name outranked the room, he expected resistance, pushback, emotion. He expected to spar. What he received instead was containment. And containment is what power looks like when it no longer needs to prove itself. I did not raise my voice. I did not explain myself. I drew a line and closed it behind him. What he still didn't understand was that the court does not react to confidence. It reacts to conduct, and his conduct had crossed into contempt the moment he chose mockery over restraint. That choice mattered, not because it offended me, but because it revealed how he would behave if allowed to leave unchanged. Courts exist to draw boundaries where people refuse to draw them for themselves. I watched his jaw tighten. The realization was coming. Slow. His body language shifted from performance to resistance. He wasn't angry, he was confused. Confusion is the last emotion people like him experience before consequences land. It's the moment when their internal rules stop matching the external ones. When I spoke, I kept my words precise. Authority does not ramble. It doesn't negotiate after being challenged. It closes. I reminded him that the room belonged to the law, not to lineage. I made it clear that posture, wealth, and proximity to power do not purchase immunity. I did not need to say more than that the meaning carried itself. Earlier, he believed attention was leverage. He believed presence equaled power, and he learned in that moment that power is the ability to end a performance without acknowledging it. The courtroom did not react to him anymore. It moved past him, and that shift was irreversible. The bailiff stepped forward, and the sound of movement cut through the silence. Not hurried, not aggressive, controlled, but that sound changes people. It signals transition. It marks the point where words no longer matter. His expression changed then, not into fear, but into disbelief. Disbelief that this was actually happening. Disbelief that the rules he lived under had stopped working. He opened his mouth as if to speak again, then stopped. For the first time since he walked in, he hesitated. That hesitation mattered. It was the first honest thing he had done in the room. He had finally realized that nothing he said next could help him. His earlier confidence had already decided the outcome. What people often miss about moments like this is that they are not about punishment. They are about correction, not for him alone, but for everyone watching. Courtrooms are classrooms, whether people admit it or not. They teach boundaries, they teach limits, they teach what happens when someone mistakes privilege for authority. As he was taken into custody, there was no outburst, no shouting, no dramatic collapse, just a quiet removal from the space he thought he owned, that more than anything stripped him of the image he had tried to project. He didn't leave as a powerful man. He left as a defendant who misjudged where he stood. I watched him go without expression, not because I felt nothing, but because emotion would have given him weight he no longer deserved. Finality. The lesson had already landed. His career, built on proximity and assumption, would not survive what happened in that room, not because of the charge alone, but because of how he revealed himself when tested. Earlier arrogance becomes tomorrow's evidence. People don't fall because they are challenged. They fall because they expose themselves while believing they cannot. He had done that willingly, on the record, in front of witnesses. There was no undoing it. The courtroom returned to its rhythm quickly. It always does. One case ends, another begins. But moments like that stay. They travel, they get replayed, not because of the sentence, but because of the contrast between who someone thinks they are and who the law says they are. If you're still here, tell me this in the comments. Have you ever seen confidence turn into carelessness right in front of you? These moments don't just happen in courtrooms. They happen in offices, in meetings, in everyday life. Power reveals itself when it thinks it's safe. He walked in, laughing. He walked out silent. And in between those two moments, everything he believed about his place in the world collapsed. Not loudly, not dramatically, completely.